Don't let them hear you counting. They said that on my first night, in the staff room where the overhead light hummed and the radiator gurgled like it was swallowing a secret. It was a joke, I thought, one of those broken-in rites to haze the new night attendant. They, in this case, were two day shift workers shrugging into coats at the door, a freckled woman named Isel and a man with the posture of a question mark who never offered his name. Isel smiled in that brittle way you learn in places like this and pointed at the faded mural across the hall. Cartoon suns, helium balloons, 13 children holding hands in a ring. Don't count the kids out loud, she said, especially after lights out. It upsets them. Why? I asked, pretending to be amused, pretending my breath wasn't already fogging in the corridor's unnatural chill. You'll see, she said, and left me with a ring of keys and the kind of silence that sounds heavy in your ears, like someone cupping their hands over them from behind. The orphanage had been a monastery before it was reclaimed by the city. Long corridors ribbed with arches, doors that sighed against warped frames, the odor of soap, dust, and something sweetly stale. The old chapel had become a cafeteria with linoleum floors. The bell tower was boarded up. The playroom where I was told to start the rounds was dotted with plastic dinosaurs and a wooden train with a missing wheel. As I walked, the motion-sensing nightlights coughed awake and then dimmed back to darkness. I'd taken the job for the hours and the quiet. My life needed a room large enough to think in, and night shifts usually offered it. But quiet in this building wasn't empty. It was a crate packed with velvet, smothering. The clock at the end of the East Hall read 9:41 and had read 9:41 every evening since the battery died in June. Someone had drawn a happy face where the second hand would have been. The kids were older than I expected, most of them 8 to 12, half feral with the compressed energy of rooms and rules. I checked bed after bed, Tariq with the chipped tooth, Lily with the thundercloud of hair and a book under the pillow, Emre, whose inhaler lived like a guardian on his nightstand, Sena, who slept with her socks on and fists clenched. They were real in that way children are, total, unedited. I counted them in my head without meaning to. 10 little lanterns of breath in the dark. At 10:12 the building murmured itself to sleep, and I took the cleaning cart for a lap around the hall, more to keep my hands busy than anything else. The wind combed through the trees outside and made shadows wriggle on the curtains. Somewhere, a pipe tapped. I passed the mural again, 13 children holding hands in a ring. I paused, looking close. Most had names written in faded marker at their feet. Some names had been scrubbed over, leaving pale halos. I don't know when I noticed the extra hand. 13 children means 26 hands. These had 27. The ring was complete at a glance, then wrong if you looked too long. 2 of the hands were clasped by something that was not a child at all, a long white shape, as if a sleeve had been painted and then scraped away and then painted again by a shaky brush. The joint of the fingers was off. I told myself the artist was bad at anatomy. I told myself a lot of things on that first night. At midnight, I made tea in a mug that said, "World's okayest, Mom," and stood at the small office window that looked out over the courtyard. Gravel, a sandbox with no toys in it, a swing set that creaked when there was no wind. The moon was a fingernail. In the courtyard lantern's light, I saw small shapes move, furtive, quick. The cats. Aisel had warned me, leave bowls of water outside or they'll scream. I took a bowl to the back step, set it down, and watched 3 shadows untangle and sip. One looked up at me and blinked, its eyes catching light. There was a 4th shadow beyond them, too tall to be a cat, a suggestion pressed into the night. When I returned to the corridor, something had shifted. The smell, maybe? The air had cooled enough to make my teeth ache. The motion light coughed and refused to come on, then burst to life with a late apology. I pushed the cart and heard the wheels whisper over tile. A whisper answered, a child's, sibilant and rhythmic. I froze and held my breath like I had been caught trespassing on something sacred. 7, 8, 9. The voices were moving, a tide sluicing through the hall from the west dormitory. I put the cart aside and followed. The whispering was soft but unmistakable, a chorus of mouths counting in unison. At the door to the west dorm, I stopped and ran a finger along the frame, paint flaking like dandruff. Inside, the nightlight painted each bed with a warm triangle. All the children lay flat, faces tipped to the ceiling, eyes open and shining. Their lips moved. 10, 11, 12. Hey, I said too loudly because I was afraid of their quiet. Lights out means asleep. They did not look at me. Their eyes were fixed on a single point above the door I'd just walked through. A shadow lay there, a smudge that deepened as I watched, like breath condensing against glass. My mouth tasted like a coin. I stepped fully into the room. 13. Their voices were softer now, excited at the edges like a hush before a secret. The smudge flexed and elongated, resolving not into a shape but the idea of one, the kind your brain invents when the closet door is ajar. A length, an elbow, a head that wasn't a head. I felt the hair on my arms prick and my scalp pull tight. Enough, I said, because adults say that when they don't know what else to do. Everyone go to sleep. Sina's lips stopped moving. Slowly, as if moving through honey, her face turned toward me. There was nothing theatrical about it, no filmic cruelty. She looked like a child whose teacher had just spoken her name. We have to count, she said, so we don't forget. Forget what? I heard myself ask, though a better question, a braver one, would have been who. Who is missing? She said simply, and went back to it. 13. I had the absurd thought to correct her, to point out that she'd already said 13, but then I realized the counting wasn't in sequence at all. It had loops, dips, a braid of numbers that moved forward and then doubled back. Not a count of time, a count of things, a roll call that kept including the same names, making sure they still answered. Stop, I tried again, softer. I reached for the switch and felt for the cold plastic. When the light came on, the shadow evaporated like a moth into a flame. The children blinked. Several sat up and squinted at me. Sleep, please, I whispered, throat tight. It's late. They obeyed, as if released from something. Bodies rolled and softened. Blankets tugged to chins. In minutes, the room was breathing again. I stood in the doorway and watched longer than I needed to, as if waiting for the shadow to reassemble. When nothing did, I closed the door carefully so it would not click. In the corridor, the mural children kept holding hands, 27 of them. I wanted to laugh, to shake my head and chalk it up to fatigue and a building's night noises, to the way kids synchronize because they want to feel like a single animal. I wanted to climb into a practical thought and ride it until morning. Instead, I walked to the end of the hall where the glass case held the old roster books. They were relics nobody consulted anymore, but the director liked how official they made the place. Black ledgers with embossed spines, dust in the ridges. I unlocked the case and slid one out at random, blew dust until it rolled like fog. Names, dates of arrival, notes in a precise script. When a child was adopted, the name was crossed through once, and the date of exit was recorded neatly. Some pages were dense with permanence. Some names appeared and ended the same day with the same narrow script. Returned to family. Remanded. Transferred. I licked my thumb and turned pages until I found last month. The script had changed hands now, looser. In the margins, a doodle of a tiny house. In the column of notes, wakes to count at night. Won't sleep unless counting is completed. I turned back a year. The same note, older, 5 years. The same handwriting, the same phrase, as reliable as the inventory of beds and sheets. Counting completed. Never a number attached to it. Never a description of what the completion meant. By 2 a.m., the cats had arranged themselves like punctuation beneath the window. I made another round and noticed something new. Chalk marks on the baseboard, a string of short lines in groups of 5, the way a prisoner carves days into a wall. They skittered around corners, dipped behind heaters, reappeared, always waist-high to a small child. In the playroom, a hopscotch grid had been drawn not in squares, but in narrow rectangles of uneven length. Each rectangle had a name written inside. My name was not there. Something in me twitched with relief, and then shame. The second night I brought stickers, a bag of oranges, a stubborn optimism. Isel had clapped when I mentioned the counting. "You handled it," she said. "Some people run the first time." She pulled a face. "They always start it again when someone new arrives." "You're the pebble in the pond." "I'm not a pond," I said, trying to keep it light. "Don't let them hear you counting," she said again, but her smile couldn't hold itself together, and this time I saw that the line was not a joke, but a superstition, a bracelet of red thread tied tight around something fragile. At 8:50, a storm rolled in like a drumbeat. By 9:30, the power hiccuped, and the generator gulped itself awake to smear the building with a softer, tremulous light. The mural's colors deepened in the damp. Someone had added a balloon to the ring of children, a red oval with a tail that ran off the wall. I reached to peel it off, then realized it had been drawn directly on the plaster in something that left a faint stain. When I pressed my thumb to it, my skin came away tacky. At 10, Lily stood in the dorm doorway with her book and said, "Miss, if we finish it faster, will it let us sleep?" "What is it?" I asked, careful with my tone. She rolled the book's corner between her fingers and looked down as if being scolded. "The house," she said. "The house doesn't like when numbers change." "I'm the only number that changed," I said, nearly teasing, nearly pleading. "I promise I'll be quiet." She smiled the way children do when adults miss the real point. "Numbers don't just go forward," she said, and slipped into bed. At 11, rain needled the windows. At 11:30, the cats vanished. At midnight, I was in the office again, looking at the courtyard, and saw a small figure cross the gravel. It was the height of a child, but moved like a person leaning against invisible hands, as if pushed. It went to the swing set and sat. The chains made no sound. The figure set its feet down carefully, pushed back, the arc slight and exact. I could not see its face. The door to the office was supposed to lock automatically, but when I turned the handle, it yielded easily, as if someone had held it open for me. In the courtyard, the rain was a lace veil, decorative but real. My shirt stuck to my back. "Hey," I called, quiet, but not quiet enough for me to lie later and say I hadn't tried. "Hey, you shouldn't be out." The swing moved, carried by a small momentum, empty. The figure was the negative of a presence, the place where a person should be, a smudge you only notice when you look away and realize something has been removed. The far door to the west hall opened, though I had not touched it. I went inside. They were already counting. 4, 5, 6. It was calmer tonight, almost gentle, as if reciting a lullaby. Each child watched the same corner above the door, where the paint had cracked in a lattice like frost. The crack lines trembled. I stood under it and felt the smallest drop on my cheek, cold as breath. "Who is missing?" I asked, because I thought that maybe, if I could say a name, it would make the room human again. They did not answer at first. Then Tariq sat up and ran a heel of his hand over his face like an old man. "We can't say," he murmured, and his eyes rolled toward the top of the door. "If we say it, we'll make room." "For who?" My voice was all edges. "For one more," Sina said, and the way she said it took the breath out of the phrase, left it slack and heavy on the floor. One more was not a person. It was a measurement, a quota. The building groaned, a sound like someone turning over in sleep. I pressed my palm to the wall and felt it hum. All the chalk marks on the baseboard seemed impossibly to be a little higher than the night before, as if the house stood on its toes. I thought about the roster books, the neat rows of names, the way the older ink had held fast, and the newer smudged. I thought about the mural and how badly it wanted to be whole, even if it had to cheat to do it. "Okay," I said, because what else does a person say to a building that wants arithmetic from them? "Okay." The counting went on. The numbers ran out of themselves and gathered themselves up again. At 3:17, either morning or night, what is time in a place that eats it? The storm blew itself east, and a short cold came down like a lid. That was when Emre's inhaler fell off his nightstand and rolled under the bed. I heard it and, grateful to move, crouched to retrieve it. The darkness under there was not darker than any other dark, but it felt heavier, as if the floor had been poured on top of something more absorbent than wood. My fingertips found the inhaler and something else. A marble. No, a bead. It was chalky, smooth, the size of a thumbnail. I pinched it and pulled it into the light. It was a tooth, small, perfect, white as the moon, a child's molar. The root had a ragged collar, as if pulled before it was ready. I held it in my palm and knew in a way that bypassed all reason that if I stood in the hall and counted the chalk marks again, there would be one more tonight than last night, and that the counting would end only when the house was satisfied the numbers had rebalanced after whatever subtraction my presence had made. Something approached down the corridor, footsteps that were neither small nor large, that came in even measure as if taking pains to be ordinary. The motion light flared and then failed. The room's nightlight fluttered like a moth in a jar. The children's voices tightened, a seam being pulled. 11, 12, and then, all at once, silence, sudden as if a hand had clapped over many mouths. I didn't turn toward the door. I stood with a tooth in my palm and realized, with a cold that touched bone, that I had been wrong about what the children were doing. They were not counting themselves to keep from forgetting. They were counting to keep the house from remembering, because if the house remembered who it had lost, it would want them back, and it would do the simplest math available to it to make the column neat. In the quiet, something breathed over the crown of my head. It was not hot or cold. It was a presence like an answer leaning down to kiss a question. I closed my hand around the tooth, until the edges bit into my skin and wanted to say my name, as if names mattered here, as if names could anchor me to the ledger where the lines were straight and the ink did not run. I wanted to count out loud to prove I knew my numbers. 1, 2, 3. I stopped. Don't let them hear you counting. A small hand slid into mine. Lily's. She squeezed once, stern as a teacher. Her gaze flicked up past my shoulder to the corner above the door, where a mistake in paint had become a mouth. If you count, she whispered, barely moving her lips, you'll teach it the steps. The breathing at the crown of my head lengthened, tasting my hair, and then receded, slow as a tide. The nightlight steadied. Somewhere far away, a cat resumed being a cat and knocked over the bowl by the back step. I knelt and placed the tooth on Emre's nightstand beside the inhaler. When I stood, the chalk marks in the hall seemed lower again, as if the house had settled back onto its heels. The children slept without counting for the rest of that night. In the morning, I forgot to tell Isel about the tooth. It is how people survive, to forget one vivid thing so another can be bearable. I washed the world's okayest mom mug and felt foolish pride for making the generator's diesel last the entire storm. I wrote a report without the word missing in it. I came back the next night and the next, and the numbers pressed around us like water in a glass, seeking their level. On my 7th night, I unlocked the glass case out of habit and slid the ledger free to see if the act of looking could change anything. The page was different. The names were where they always were, but a new one had been added between 2 older entries, in a hand I didn't know, as if it had always belonged there and I had only just learned to see it. It was mine. There was no date of arrival, only the shaky, faithful note that hummed like the radiator in my bones. Wakes to count at night. Won't sleep unless counting is completed. I watched my name ripple on the page like something breathing under shallow water, and I did not tear it out. I did not draw a line through it and write, return to family in a brave hand. I turned the ledger closed and slid it back into its place, the dust accepting it as if it had never moved. In the west dorm, the lights were already low. The children were not counting. They never